27 years have passed since that fateful night in Paris, when Princess Diana lost her life in a car crash that shook the world to its core. For Princes William and Harry, that loss was not only the unbearable pain of losing their mother, it was the turning point that would shape the course of their entire lives. William, just 15, suddenly had to shoulder the image of a strong and composed heir, even as his young heart lay in pieces. Harry, only 12, wrestled with rage in a deep sense of abandonment, emotional scars he would only dare to speak of years later. They grew up behind the cold, imposing walls of the monarchy, where private grief was hidden away behind the serene faces presented to the public. But recently, the rare moment shattered that facade. In a closed-door gathering of the royal family, Prince William unexpectedly rose to his feet, holding an old letter. Its envelope yellowed with age. It was from his mother, Princess Diana, written just 3 days before her death. As William began to read, each word seemed to cut through space and time, carrying with it the familiar voice of the Rose of England. They say King Charles is a master of suppressing his emotions, but this time, he could not. Tears slid down his face, and the room was swallowed by a heavy silence. Centuries of royal restraint seemed to collapse in that single moment. What could possibly have been in that letter, powerful enough to make even those who had weathered political storms and personal scandals tremble? Why had it been hidden away for more than 2 decades, only to resurface now? And could Diana's final words, the words of a woman once adored more than any other, yet wounded more deeply than most, truly have the power to change the course of the monarchy forever? Inside Buckingham Palace's Great Hall, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Gilded columns rose around the room as members of the royal family took their seats, formal, quiet, unreadable. At the center stood Prince William, holding a small, time-worn envelope. His fingers moved slowly across the flap, almost reverently, with all eyes locked on him. Every breath felt as though it might shake the palace walls. This letter was written 3 days before her death. William began, his voice steady but low. The silence in the room turned icy. Even those accustomed to protocol and poise felt something shift. Charles turned his head, his jaw tightening. Camilla's hands, clasped in her lap, fidgeted. She did not look up. Diana's letter had returned, and with it, the shadow of an unfinished truth. The weight of the moment was not political, it was personal. For years, the monarchy had tread carefully around Diana's memory, praising her in public while tightly controlling her legacy behind palace doors. But now, William had broken that barrier not through scandal or rebellion, but through her own words, a kind no royal could spin or deny. "This is not just a letter," he said softly. "It's her voice, her final voice." The entire room, Charles, Camilla, senior aides, sat frozen. This was not a speech, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The Great Hall was no longer just regal, it was emotional, vulnerable, and for the first time in years, truly human. But what did Diana actually write? What words had she saved for her son in her final days? What truth did she leave behind, waiting for the right moment? Up next, the letter is read aloud, a mother's love, a father's plea for forgiveness, and a message that could heal or reopen every royal wound. Reading Diana's final words. William held the letter carefully, his thumb pressed against a faint crease in the paper. The room was motionless, not even the guard stirring. "My darling William," he read. In that instant, it was no longer a summit. It was a son reading his mother's final thoughts. Her handwriting, her voice, her love came alive again for everyone to hear. The words flowed softly, "Never forget who you are, and forgive your father." The room's temperature seemed to drop. Charles shifted in his chair, his eyes blinking rapidly. For years, his grief had been private, guarded. But now, the wounds Diana once carried had found their way back to him, on paper, in front of his family. It was not angry or bitter, it was gentle. "Love will always carry you through," Diana had written. Her tone was full of grace, not politics. not accusation, just a mother guiding her son through a future she would not see. In doing so, she left a blueprint not for power, but for peace. As William folded the letter, his hands trembled slightly. He did not need to say more. Diana already had. Her words were not just a memory, they were a direction: forgiveness, compassion, legacy. For a moment, the monarchy was not about titles or duties. It was about a mother's final hope, carried forward by the son she left behind. But emotions cannot be contained forever, and no royal gathering can escape fallout. As the weight of Diana's words sank in, something broke not silence, but Charles. For the first time, the king showed something more powerful than leadership pain. What followed was unforgettable. Emotional fallout. The room was still, but William's voice had unlocked something deep. A single tear slid down Charles's cheek. He did not wipe it away. His lips quivered, and his hands, normally held in royal composure, trembled slightly in his lap. This was not the king, this was a man, a father facing the ghost of his past. In that moment, centuries of royal restraint shattered. "I didn't know she wrote that," Charles whispered, almost to himself. The words were not meant for the room, but they echoed. His eyes welled again. You could feel his heart cracking open. The man known for his distance now sat exposed, no crown, no armor, just regret. Camilla, seated beside him, looked frozen. Her eyes darted to the floor, then briefly to the letter. Her jaw tightened, but her expression remained unreadable. Was it guilt, fear, or simply shock? She said nothing. In that silence, everyone else had begun to feel the weight. Aides at the back exchanged glances. Some looked down, unsure where this emotional storm would lead. The message had landed, not just the words, but the truth behind them. This was not about scandal or revenge. It was about a family, long held together by duty, finally forced to feel. As Charles sat there, eyes red, shoulders slumped, one truth became clear: Diana had spoken again. And this time, the world was listening. But how did Diana know this day might come? What made her write a letter with such precision and care? The answer lies in the past, hidden in a whisper, sealed in an envelope, and protected by the one man she trusted most. Coming up, the flashback that changes everything, Diana's secret. It was a late evening at Kensington Palace. The lights were dim, the staff minimal. Diana stood by her writing desk, a soft cardigan wrapped around her. She held the envelope in her hand, sealed and addressed not to William, but to her butler. She whispered softly, "Oh, seriously, if it ever comes to this, make sure he sees it." Her voice, tender but sure, carried across decades. There may come a day when they need the truth, not through headlines or scandals, but through my words. That night, she gave her butler the letter and a mission. It was not about revenge. It was about love finding its way, no matter how late. Diana was thoughtful, strategic, aware. She was not naive. She knew her story could be twisted, erased, or buried under royal silence. So she planned ahead, not just for William, but for Charles, for the institution, for the legacy she believed in. She did not scream for justice. She planted seeds for healing. That letter, buried for more than 2 decades, was not a coincidence, it was destiny. Diana did not just live a public life. She left behind a private truth. Her foresight was not dramatic, it was powerful. Emotional intelligence in its purest form. But destiny comes at a cost. For Charles, Diana's return through that letter was not just a message, it was a mirror. What he saw reflected back was painful. Coming up, the king breaks not in rage, but in a raw, quiet collapse. Get ready to witness the most human moment of his reign. Charles's breakdown. Charles sat motionless in his chair, his eyes red. his jaw trembling. Then it came a tear, full and unhidden, rolled down his cheek. The room did not move. He was not King Charles at that moment. He was just Charles. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed. His lips pressed together. The grief he had managed for years, sometimes hidden, sometimes hardened, was now in full view. He did not sob, but the heartbreak was there. He was not crying for the crown. He was crying for Diana, for the past, and perhaps for himself. His aides, trained to stay composed, glanced nervously. One stepped forward, then stopped. What do you do when your monarch weeps? No guidebook covers this, but the moment was real. And for once, it felt like honesty had broken through the marble walls of the monarchy. Public tears from a king are rare but powerful. This was not a PR moment. It was not for the cameras. It was what happens when the weight of history and guilt becomes too much. For Charles, this breakdown was not weakness. It was the first crack in a fortress that had stood untouched for decades. A mother's compassion. William looked down at the final part of the letter, his voice soft. She wanted peace, even after the pain. The room, still soaked in emotion, grew even quieter. This was not just closure, it was a turning point. Diana had not written to blame. She had written to forgive. Her forgiveness filled the great hall. She wanted you to be better, William added gently, looking toward his father. The words were not harsh, they were hopeful. For all the chaos Diana had faced, her last wish was not revenge, it was unity. That message hit deeper than any title ever could. Even the aides began to lower their guard. This was not scandal, it was healing. Diana became more than a memory in that moment. She became a guide. Even in death, she reached across generations to remind her family who they were meant to be. Legacy through love, William repeated, echoing her exact words. Suddenly, the conflict did not feel like a battle anymore. It felt like a chance, perhaps the last one. Anne, seated near the edge, nodded quietly. Camilla turned slightly toward William. Even Charles raised his eyes again. Still misty, but no longer shattered. For the first time in years, Diana's name was not spoken in whispers. It was read aloud with love and clarity, not to destroy, but to rebuild. But rebuilding is never simple, especially when past tensions still simmer in silence. One royal silence is deafening, Camilla. Her presence, her posture, her stillness, it all begs the question, what role does she really play in this family story? Coming up, we decode Camilla's silence and what it might be hiding. Camilla's silent presence. Camilla sat upright, but her shoulders were tight. Her face was frozen in a kind of quiet shock. No tears, no anger, just stillness. But her eyes told another story. She avoided looking at William and never met Charles's gaze. She seemed present physically but emotionally somewhere far away. Her silence was not calm, it was loaded. Every camera angle that caught her face showed something different. Some saw guilt, others read defiance. Was she bracing herself for judgment or quietly refusing to be part of this public reckoning? No words came from her, but her silence said more than any statement could. She did not nod, smile, or flinch. Royal aides at the side exchanged subtle glances. This was not the supportive partner Camilla had tried to become over 2 decades. This was the woman whose presence still sparked division. Some viewers watching the summit live tweeted, "She looks like a guest at her own trial." Another post read, "She knows exactly what that letter meant and what it left unsaid." Was she an obstacle to reconciliation or a reluctant witness to it? That's the question now circling inside and outside the palace. Diana's words were about love, forgiveness, and unity, but Camilla's presence cast a long, complicated shadow, one that even time and titles had not fully erased. In her silence, the future of that reconciliation felt suddenly uncertain. But while Camilla stayed quiet, one connection quietly reignited between brothers, once thought irreparably broken. They did not speak, but they did not need to. In our next chapter, a single glance, a shared grief, and the question that's been haunting everyone: could Diana's letter bring William and Harry back together? Let's find out. The brothers react. William folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope like a sacred artifact. He took a breath, glanced to his left, and for a moment looked toward the doorway. Harry was not in the room but was watching, we're told, from a nearby chamber. When their eyes met through the open archway, it said everything. For years, tension had defined them, the words unsaid, wounds unhealed. But in that glance, brief, honest, raw, there was something different. William's face softened. Harry's eyes looked glassy. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. For a moment, it saw them. They were just sons, not princes or headlines, just Diana's boys holding the same grief. Charles did not react, but aides noticed. One royal staffer whispered, "It's the first time they've acknowledged each other like that in years." The moment passed quickly, but it mattered. Maybe Diana's words did not just heal old wounds, they reopened a connection once thought gone. Whether it was enough remains unclear, but the bridge was no longer broken, it had a foundation. That glance lit up the world. Social media exploded. William and Harry lock eyes. Could this be the start of peace? Photos were shared. Polls were launched. And for the first time in months, the public did not argue, they hoped. Deep down, everyone wanted what Diana wanted, not just forgiveness, but family. But while eyes were on the brothers, the outside world was already spinning headlines, hashtags, breaking news. The monarchy's most vulnerable moment had become its most watched. In our next act, we leave the Great Hall and dive into the firestorm outside, where the press, the public, and the power of perception threatened to rewrite the royal story. Public and press reaction. Within minutes, the media had a frenzy on their hands. King breaks down over Diana's letter, blared one headline. Princes reunited through tears, read another. News anchors scrambled to update their scripts. Every network carried footage from the summit, be ITV, Sky, every station locked into one story. It was not a scandal. It was a moment. Social media lit up. The hashtag #Diana's words trended globally within 20 minutes. People shared memories, photos, even old clips of Diana hugging her sons. Some tweeted, "She's still guiding them even now." Others shared clips of Charles crying, "I never thought I'd feel for him like this," one post said. Sympathy surged in real time. Mouse. Pundits weighed in instantly. Some said it was the most human moment in recent royal history. Others questioned the timing. Did William plan this? One commentator asked. But overall, something shifted. The monarchy, long viewed as cold and distant, had suddenly bled publicly, emotionally, and people responded not with mockery, but with empathy. Polls showed a spike in favorability for William. Charles's numbers rose slightly too, mostly from older viewers. But what really moved people was the message "legacy through love" became a headline quote. Diana, in death, had sparked a conversation no press machine could have manufactured. The question now, could the monarchy carry that message forward, or would they retreat back inside the palace? That question was already causing panic. Emotional openness is powerful but dangerous. The firm's traditions were not built to handle tears, letters, and personal truths. In the next chapter, the palace goes into crisis mode because behind the beauty of a breakthrough lies the fear of losing control. Institutional reckoning. Inside palace walls, alarms were not sounding, but they might as well have been. The communications team had barely caught their breath when the full weight of the summit hit. "We need to respond fast," said one senior aide. The emotion had spilled out publicly. The crown's composure, its most guarded asset, was cracked. And tradition had no playbook for this. Meetings were called at lightning speed. Old school advisors demanded silence, while younger strategists called for transparency. "We can't pretend this didn't happen," one said. People saw the king crime, but that was exactly what the monarchy had avoided for decades: human messiness. Now it was everywhere, on screens, in papers, on timelines. Some push for reform makes space for real emotion. Show the world we're evolving. Others wanted damage control. Do not let Diana's letter define the monarchy. The conflict was not just emotional, it was generational. Could the palace adapt its stiff upper lip, or would it harden again, afraid of change? The stakes were enormous. Keep the monarchy relatable or risk becoming irrelevant. For now, sure, no statement came. But aides whispered of upcoming changes: more open appearances, possible interviews, acknowledgement of Diana's message. Under all the spin, one fear lingered: what happens when truth touches the throne? Once people see what's real, they may never accept the polished version again. But for Charles, the crisis was not just professional, it was personal. He had held on to that letter for over 20 years, kept it hidden, protected, or buried Diana's words. Why was it guilt? Was it fear? In our next chapter, we face Charles's secret, and it just might be the most painful truth of all. Charles's dilemma. Alone in his private quarters, Charles held the original letter again, creased, yellowed, and deeply familiar. He had not seen it in years, but he had never forgotten it. He was the one who locked it away. The question now echoed louder than ever: why hide his late wife's final words from their son for so long? Some say he did it to protect William from pain, confusion, and the pressures of royalty. Others believe it was fear that Diana's voice would overshadow his rule, that her grace would forever compete with his authority. The truth was probably both. Now he could not run from it. The moment he watched William read those words aloud, something inside him broke, not from shock, but from shame. He had carried this secret for over 2 decades, believing he was doing the right thing. But Diana's voice still reached her son without his permission. And now the world knew she had trusted William more than anyone else. Charles sat silently, staring out the window. Was I loyal to my crown or to my family, he asked himself. The answer was not clear. But what was clear was the cost of silence, of control, of years spent hiding instead of healing. With that letter now free, the crown weighed heavier than ever. But Charles is not the only one at a crossroads. William and Harry now stand face to face with their mother's final message. Will it bring them closer or push them further apart? The next chapter is a defining moment in royal brotherhood, because the question is no longer whether they can unite, but whether they even want to. Brothers at the crossroads. The brothers met in a quiet corridor after the summit ended. No cameras, no audience, just the heavy stillness between them. William spoke first. She wanted peace, and he said. Harry nodded, arms crossed. She always did. It was not dramatic or warm, but it was real. A conversation that had waited years to happen was now unfolding quietly. Their lives had taken opposite paths. One stayed, one left, one followed duty, one followed heart. But for the first time, they were not debating their choices. They were reflecting on their pain. You blamed me for leaving, Harry said. William looked down. I blamed you for making it harder to stay. It was not an argument. It was truth. They talked about Diana, about childhood, about the letter, about how even now her presence was stronger than ever. She wanted us together. William said, but not at any cost. Harry replied, there it was, the divide. They loved the same mother but saw her legacy differently. The monarchy still stood between them. They did not reconcile, not fully, but they did not walk away angry either. It was a start, a handshake, a look that said, we're not done yet. For two brothers carrying the world's expectations, that single quiet moment felt louder than any public statement. It was not unity, but it was not goodbye either. But now the weight of Diana's words falls on the entire monarchy. Will the crown listen to her message or reject it? Is this the start of something new or the end of the old world? In our final chapter, we ask the hardest question. What does a monarchy built on empathy truly look like? Monarchy at a turning point. Diana's final letter did not just move hearts. It cracked the core of royal tradition. Empathy over entitlement, that's what she wanted. But the question now echoes louder than ever. Can the monarchy adapt? Can it make space for emotion, for humanity? Without losing the structure that kept it alive for centuries, Charles must decide, does he embrace the transparency and vulnerability he once feared? Or does he pull back, rebuild the walls, and return to the old ways? His next steps could define his legacy forever. One choice leads toward evolution, the other preservation. The clock is ticking. William feels the pressure too. As heir, he is caught between loyalty to his father and the truth of his mother's words. His every move will be watched. Will he become a modern monarch built on emotional connection, or will he follow the same royal mold he spent a lifetime studying? The future is not written, but it is already unfolding. Harry, though no longer a working royal, remains the outsider with the clearest view. He sees the institution as it truly is. With Diana's message now public, he may play a bigger role than anyone expects. This is not just about titles anymore. It is about legacy and the soul of the crown itself. The question is not just what Diana left behind. It is what the monarchy does with it. Will they honor her final wish or let it fade like so many before the future of the royal family hangs in the balance? One thing is certain after this: nothing will ever be the same again. The letter has been read, the tears have fallen, and now the monarchy stands at a crossroads. Diana's words, intimate, forgiving, unforgettable, have reopened old wounds, unearthed long-buried truths, and reminded the world that a legacy is not measured by crowns, but by compassion. For King Charles, this moment is more than just a personal reckoning. It is perhaps the most profound test of his reign. For William and Harry, it is a fragile ground upon which decades of strained brotherhood, public scrutiny, and private grief converge. The world is watching, holding its breath, wondering whether this revelation will be the spark that heals the fractures or the final blow that splinters the House of Windsor beyond repair. In these gilded halls, where tradition is often valued above truth, the echo of Diana's voice feels almost revolutionary. Her message, written in a hand that once waved to millions, yet belonged to a woman who often felt desperately alone, now hangs in the air, impossible to ignore. Perhaps it will inspire reconciliation, drawing two brothers back from the brink. Or perhaps it will deepen the divides, as the weight of history and personal pain proves too much to bear. One thing is certain: the monarchy will never be quite the same again. A single letter, sealed in secrecy for over 2 decades, has shifted the narrative of 1,000 years of royal history. And though the ink has long dried, the consequences of its words are still being written. This chapter is not the end, it is the beginning of a reckoning. The question is no longer just what Diana said, but what the royal family will do next. And the whole world is waiting for the answer.